Great.
Got it.
I feel like people are coming in with more frequency now, so maybe I'll just wait one more minute.
Hmm.
Okay. Then I'll probably go into like very stiff formal mode and then
Hmm.
and then do this little introduction.
Great.
Dejha, I took over the slides, so I have my slides up right now. Um,
Okay. So I'll have to share again.
yeah.
Okay. Just give me the cue.
hmm Okay. Are you ready?
Hmm.
Okay. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Some more people are coming in, so we'll just wait a moment or two to kick it off. Thank you for joining us today. All right, here we go. Um, Welcome to the Source Generative Art Lecture Series. I'm Casey Reas, the co-director of social software and a professor in the Department of UCLA's Design Media Arts Department. For the Source series, we've asked each artist to share their story, how they began working with generative art, the projects that defined their practice, and what they're exploring now. So each lecture is followed by a 15-minute Q&A with its host. I'm thrilled to be hosting Operator today and to welcome Dejha and Ania Catherine. Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Casey.
Uh, into the future, next Tuesday, April 7th, we'll present the source lecture for Mitchell Chan, hosted by Lauren Lee McCarthy, co-director of social software. You can scan this QR code for more information and to RSVP. The Tuesday after that, April 14th, we're presenting the source lecture with Martin Grazer, hosted by Jeff Davis of the Generative Art Foundation. This one is a hybrid lecture, both at UCLA's Broad Art Center and here over Zoom as well. So I hope you can join for these upcoming lectures. So Source is co-sponsored by three groups. The first is social software. Social software collaborates with others to create art that explores the role of software and culture. Oops. Next, the Generative Art Foundation is dedicated to elevating generative art in all of its forms and promoting creative coding as a meaningful artistic practice. Last, the UCLA Department of Design Media Arts cultivates a comprehensive, multidisciplinary approach to artistic practice that focuses on experimentation and innovation. Next fall, we're opening admissions for a new computational art BA degree. So I'm going to stop sharing and introduce Operator. So Anya Catherine and Dejha are an artist duo whose collaborative practice, Operator, develops critical and conceptual approaches to experience. With Ty's background as a multimedia artist and HCI technologist, and Catherine's as a choreographer and performance artist, they engineer medium-agnostic output, joining environment, technology, and the body. Their exploration into privacy and extractive technologies began with their installation On View in 2019, commissioned by the SCAD Museum of Art, and continues with the Privacy Collection, a durational release of works exploring the tension between privacy and transparency in blockchain technology. For their seminal work, Human Unreadable, they created an on-chain generative choreographic method. So welcome, Dejha, welcome, Anya. Thanks for accepting the invitation to share your work today. So please go ahead, share screen and go for it. And then I'll join you when you're done for a short Q&A.
Okay, pleasure is all ours. Thank you for having us, Casey. I'm Dejha,
And I'm Ania Catherine.
and today we prepared a presentation in response to some structured questions given to us by Casey in the source series. And it was wonderful putting these together because it allowed us to think of our practice in a way that we generally don't present it. And so for any familiar faces, there are some potentially works that you know about already, but then we kind of dug deep into other areas of our practice. So we're going to begin with the first, which the question proposed to us was share your most iconic work, which is an interesting question to answer. We thought we would choose an artwork that we developed. It's called Unsigned, and it's rooted in the research work by Dr. Helen Gorel. And she has this quote here: the addition of a woman's signature can devalue artwork to the extent that female artists are more likely to leave their work unsigned. And Ania, I'll let you take it from here.
So this actually is a collaboration with Annika Meyer, and it's a collection of women and non-binary artists' signatures. And it was really born at a dinner table, as a lot of artworks somehow find themselves being, where we were just discussing this finding of the signature of an artist who is not a male having basically a negative value. And this was there was a bit more of like a crypto art boom happening. And we thought, what if we kind of leveraged the crypto art market to reverse the negative value of women and non-binary artists' signatures, and by turning them into art objects themselves. So if we can prove that a signature has a positive value, then we can reverse basically this kind of sad reality of the contemporary art world pricing. So that's exactly what we did. And we gathered a selection of 100 artists and sold their signatures. And now I think the cheapest signature in the collection is around 5,000 USD. So I think we kind of flipped the negative value of the signature by turning them into art objects. And then we created this appendage piece called Acts of Devaluation, where we asked ourselves the question, if this is true, if the signature has a negative value, then how much can we devalue an art object in 90 minutes? So we signed our names on a scroll at Francisco Carolina Museum in Linz for 90 minutes to see how low the value can go.
Okay. The second question was if we could share our breakout work. I thought this was an interesting question, and Ania and I both had various different answers for the same question. I think it's possible that an answer could, hold multiple simultaneous truths at one time. So we have to frame this for you because it was funny in a lot. So Operator turned 10 this year, so it's our 10-year anniversary. We started in 2016, and along the 10 years, I think since 2018, every project that we created, we're like, oh, this is the one, this is our breakout work. And then we're like, when we speak at MUTEC, it was 2016 or 2018, when we speak at MUTEC at the Art and Tech Summit, that will be
everything's going to change.
When we have our first museum show, that's going to be our breakout moment. When we sell our first artwork for X amount of money, that will be our first breakout. And so the carrot just kept dangling in front of us, and 10 years passed, and it's still hard to answer that question, but we're going to go with an artwork called On View. So this is 3 years after we started our practice. We started developing the work in 2018. It was commissioned by the SCAD Museum of Art. This is an artwork that looks at the phenomenon of selfie culture and its relationship to viewing art. And it was an artwork that there's a book that came out the month actually that this exhibition went on view called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. And at that time, we didn't have this book yet. And so
This
we didn't
piece
have
went live the same month that the book came out. So it literally, like, we got the phrase like the month that the artwork was finished. We were like, thank you.
it created a vernacular, a structure, a way of
Mhm.
thinking, other conventions that people were able to think about this problem of extractive technologies. So we built this artwork also in response to, we were living in LA at the time, and we would have experiential marketing companies calling us all the time, like, can you create an artwork commissioned by blah 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 brand, and it's really important that it's also a good selfie backdrop. I hate to say that, but everything was briefed in this time period that way. And for us, we just saw this as a co-opting of performance and installation art that, we've seen since like the 50s and 60s and 70s. And you see all these artworks on their mood board, Yayoi Kusama. And we just kind of, thought it would be interesting to look at the subject of viewing art and the choreography of viewing art, and the aspect that the choreography of viewing art became viewing the art with your back to the wall. And are you going to see yourself on view, or are you going to see the artwork on view, is the question. And so we developed this almost like theoretical parallel to the selfie stage. So we almost use that kind of infrastructure as the medium. We were given a 20 by 80 foot blank gallery in which you can see the model of how we built it out after. So every wall that you see there, every scenic element is something that we brought in. And this artwork happened in 3 phases. It's an experiential artwork. And the first phase of the artwork is called Terms and Conditions. And Ania, I'll let you run through the different phases if you want to speak through them. When we go to phase 2 already, or do you want to add anything here?
A note on phase 1 was it actually started, phase 1 was a requirement that we were going to be photographing the audience participant, and we needed them to know, we needed their consent. So it was kind of a turning the bug into a feature, because we thought it would kind of kill the surprise if we handed everyone a contract and said, hey, we're going to be taking your photo inside this installation, because then they kind of know what's happening, and that ruined the secret. So we actually turned the entire first phase of the artwork into an immersive contract that the audience participant had to sign. And once they were standing on the center, then it had a sensor, and there was kind of this LED light animation that circled them, which was drawing on the Instagram story loading UI. So that basically they consent to being photographed by standing in that circle. But I don't think anyone ever really thought so much about it didn't ruin the moment, but we still got them to consent. Then the stages gallery, there was 2 designated photo areas where they would need to be positioned in a position that we designed, and we enforced that by using sensors. So basically they could unlock having their photo taken by being posed in a way that we designed and enforced using sensors. So this is our way of saying, yes, if you're coming to the museum to be the subject of the artworks that you are seeing, then we will let you be the subjects of the artwork, but we will have to do it in a way that we are designing. So it was kind of playful. And then
Also, I'll just add here, it was also developed in a way that you couldn't actually, so here you see all this photography, but you actually couldn't take a photo in this area.
It was very hard to shoot
because it was so dimly lit. And also, in order to experience the work, you couldn't have your photo taken. But if you were, because you had to essentially be looking at a facial recognition look at camera, and that activated in that body position when you were looking away from the art, you activated all of the art around you.
So you had to choose to be the subject of the art or to actually experience the space that you were in, which was interesting. And the third phase was the Golden Gallery, which is where you become the subject of the art experience. You stand in the center, again, on one of these circles, and then suddenly your image that was just taken in the room is in this gold frame and in a bulletproof art case and with a security guard guarding it. And you are on view, and you become the fine art on view in the museum. And of course, people were asking, how did you know it was me? Like, how did the scene know? And the security guard, fun fact about this piece, one of my favorite details, is I studied the choreography of museum security guards, and I created a sequence that the performer would perform around the case. But a lot of people did think it was a security guard, but it was actually a student performed on the choreography of actual museum security guards.
Trained to look bored and yawn occasionally as well.
Mhm.
So here what you're seeing, so how did we involve, so this is a digital artwork, and um, what you primarily see on the right-hand side is something that looks fairly physical. There's no screen as an intermediary to your experience. And on the left, you can see a screen recording of our touch designer system, which was the main brain. And so what we did is that we installed hundreds of fiber optic cable, built them into the subfloors and into the ceiling of the exhibition. And they were connected to dozens of microprocessor devices, facial recognition cameras. And essentially what was happening is that there was an audience profile built from the moment that you were coming through. And so the installation was creating this profile of you as you were going through the selfie stage. And so, as Ania said, when you arrive to the Golden Gallery, only you are on view to yourself. There was no way to take that photo out of the system. The system wasn't connected to the internet, fully hosted locally, but you had these environmental sensors. And so there was this element of physical computing and ubiquitous computing. And I always like to say the good thing about ubiquitous computing is that it's invisible, but the bad thing about ubiquitous computing is that it's invisible, because you essentially have this experience that is so seamless in terms of like the technology integrated into your environment that you have an element of power asymmetry as you are, totally aware. And so we were mimicking the use of technology, how it is present in our everyday life now. But I think we have to ask this question again, but actually what was our breakout work? And through the frame of, I would say, also recognition. And unfortunately, a lot of times recognition comes with like commercial success as well. And for the first 7 years of our practice, we didn't sell any art because we're experiential artists. And we thought, well, we're not going to make flat art, as much as gallerists and folks were trying to get us to sell our work. We relied mostly on commissions. But that changed in 2022 and 2023 with our work, Human Unreadable. Human Unreadable, we began in 2022, and here you can see some exhibition photos. It is ongoing and it commences at the end of 2026. This is a long form on-chain generative artwork in which we wanted to, as it's part of the privacy collection, look at the further exploration of hiding within plain sight, as we look at the tension between privacy and transparency inherent in blockchain technology, being known for being unknown, hiding within transparent systems, but also asking the question, how do we bring the human body, which is such a central aspect to our practice, to the core of a fully on-chain artwork. So this artwork was released on Art Blocks Curated May 2023. There are 3 phases. We call it the slow recovery of the human as the full arc. These phases unravel over 3.5 years. So phase 1 was the mint on Art Blocks. This is where the day of the sale, there were 400 artworks that were minted. I'm going to quickly go through the acts and then we can speak more about them. Act 2 is the uncovering of the choreography. And so the way that the artwork works is that we developed a deterministic choreographic algorithm. And so we built everything in P5.js. Thank you, Lauren McCarthy, for that technology, and also to Casey for processing. And in that model, essentially what happened is that we put Ania in a motion capture suit. We uploaded through a sort of compression process that we developed, all of the motion data, high resolution on chain. And our choreographic algorithm that was stored in our script essentially generated a unique dance from those 31 moves that we stored on the Ethereum blockchain. And so before any visual that existed, so here are the visuals of the work in Act 1, first, predating that just moments before was a unique dance. And that unique dance became a thumbprint, a unique identifier for generating all the parameters and the values for those parameters in the artistic output. So Act 2 was the ability several months later, I think this was in October and November of 2023, where collectors could connect their wallet to a website that we developed, an experience where they could reveal the underlying choreography, because this was all available and sort of visible on chain the moment that artwork was minted, but it was obfuscated. And so that ties again back to the sort of slow recovery of the human, where the human becomes more and more visible as we continue. These two tokens, Act 1 and Act 2, use something called an owner of function. And this allows for the artwork that was generated from the dance sequence to always be bound together. So they're soul bound, so you can't separate these two works. And then Act 3, Ania, if you want to speak about Act 3 briefly.
Yeah, Act 3 is the culmination of Human Unreadable. So the work started with basically my body moving, and then that movement and kind of conceptually the human gets obfuscated and translated and downsampled and is hiding, and then slowly becomes more visible over time through the acts. And so the work culminates in basically eliminating all technological mediation that has come between the human body and the audience. And the first 100 sequences from the collection are going to be used as the raw material for an original evening length work, where the audience can experience generative art through the body as an interface rather than through a screen. And this process in Human Unreadable generally has, we just want to acknowledge some of the historical roots. Definitely the EAT movement of the 1960s, experiments in art and technology, where it was very clear and intertwined that kind of people working with technology and performers and choreographers were so mixed together, I think, in a way that there's been a bit of a distance between those communities over the years. But at the beginning and like around the 60s, this was very common. Yvonne Rainer, Simone Forti, like performance was really central to like most art being made with technology, which I love. And then Ana Olivia Cordiero, who has since become a very dear friend, a pioneer in computational choreography. And then, can you go back one?
Yep.
And then Merce Cunningham and Chance Dance, where he was using analog algorithms and dice rolling in order to generate choreography. So if you roll a 2, then you turn. If you roll a 6, then you jump, this kind of thing. So Human Unreadable is kind of at the intersection of, I would say, a few different movements, but generally these 3 buckets, I would say.
So in order to create Human Unreadable, we developed a on-chain generative choreography method, which serves as the technical backbone for Human Unreadable. It was the process primarily in which we were able to get the human body on chain in a meaningful way. I won't go in too much detail just due to time. But I can quickly run you through this, in which the first line you can see is the development of the movement library. And so having a conceptual movement framework to tie to the artwork of Human Unreadable. Ania developed individual moves before we captured anything. She iterated that in, I think, 5 different countries with probably over 30 dancers, where she had them perform the moves in random sequences. And so we did this process of test and revise and test and revise until we were happy, put her in a motion capture suit. That was a high resolution FBX file, which is kind of like the resolution quality you would rigged to a Hollywood avatar, for example. But it was too expensive to store that on chain. I think the estimate then was about $200,000, of which we did not have. And even if we did, it wasn't necessarily the best use of money. So we thought, well, how can we downsample but preserve the essence of the move? So we developed a series of applications through Touch Designer, where we were able to have Ania compress the data by choreographing in spreadsheets and examining the avatar frame by frame, and then having the bones on the right hand side, in which we put Ania on some bone budgets, and we're like, how many bones? Like, there's 188 bones in this avatar, but you're on a budget of 77 bones and like 14 frames of movement for each 3 seconds of movement. And so what this finally ended up in is a bunch of numbers in a JSON file. The body part library, which is those like major silhouettes that you see, are all in each Human Unreadable, are programmatically drawn. We essentially recreated SVGs, because in art blocks you can only have one library dependency. We were using the P5JS library, so we had to kind of recreate sort of the data and put it in a text file, and then the P5JS project would then redraw those elements on the canvas, but they effectively were just a bunch of numbers. As I already told you, we developed a deterministic generative model, which basically takes the token hash, runs it through a deterministic random function, which is something that Artblocks creates, just so gamers, like traders, can't game the algorithm. That random hash was pushed into our choreographic algorithm. It created a unique dance out of 31 moves. And so there's 400 unique dance sequences, as there are 400 unique visual outputs. The choreographic elements and all the underlying motion data within each of those 400 scores were then mapped to the parameters in our P5JS file, which we had program in which we had generative glass, we had programmatic body parts, we had motion paths driven by signature bones in the sequence, and we had something called an X-ray machine shader, in which all of these elements were combined together and outputted into a final image. Then lastly, the choreographic score, which I already discussed a bit. These are fully on chain. They're dynamic SVG renders. So each score that you see in Act 2 is pulling from one single SVG library that is stored across hundreds of smart contracts in the Ethereum blockchain. It pulls in that SVG data and draws those elements every time you render the page. So this is a method in which the intention from the beginning was to do two things. One, create a protocol that others can use. And this is a protocol that has been used, a method that has been used by other artists and institutions. Here you can see Hermine Bourdain's work from 2024 that premiered at the Paris Opera House. So she had a collection of 100 pieces in which the method was used. But primarily the idea with the method was we wanted to create choreography to be collectible as an art object. Visual art has always been, I would say, like privileged in terms of how it can interact with the art world, institutionally as well as in the art market. And so by having everything processed through this model and method that we developed, it allowed people to collect choreography. And the day of the sale, we tweeted this from the operator account. By the end of the day, we were being hopeful. We didn't know if hundreds of people would actually be collecting, but we were crossing our fingers. But hundreds of people will have collected choreography. And so while people rocked up that day to collect generative art, choreography snuck through the back door. In the interest of time, Ania, I don't know if there's anything you want to say here, if you want to move to the next project.
Yeah, just maybe for some people who are not familiar with kind of the dance and performance world and kind of how separate it usually is from the contemporary art world, mostly just because it doesn't have a market, it's not a thing. It's, something that takes place in theaters and has kind of a whole different model around how people who make performance are compensated, how dancers are compensated. And because of those models, a lot of times what happens is people don't really like own the work that they are making. Like you might get commissioned by a theater or something, and then they own the IP to the performance that you make. In across the US, theaters are closing left and right, and kind of like independent performance and dance companies are finding it increasingly difficult to survive. And if you're relying on ticket sales, also what that does is it makes it so you're then needing to cater to what brings people into the seats, which pushes performance and dance further towards what's entertaining and pushes dance and performance like it's always going dangerously close into entertainment, basically just in order to survive and sustain economically. So we like thinking about if movement can become an artwork and something doesn't have to be entertaining in order for someone to be able to make money because they're not trying to sell out a theater by getting hundreds of people to come and watch it and enjoy it. But what if we thought about movement and choreography as an art object, as something that maybe it speaks to one person and they see a gesture and that gesture really speaks to them and they want to own that gesture? Like what does it look like to separate and contextualize and rework how we think about ephemeral work like movement, choreography, and performance in a way that it can reach more people, kind of be part of the art market in a way that empowers performance makers, choreographers, dancers economically. And this is kind of the larger vision.
So to recap this project, which probably does serve as the actual breakout artwork to answer that question finally. This has been a 4.5-year journey, and that artwork finally comes to a conclusion with Act 3 happening at a museum in New York City in November of 2026. So next, how did you get started in generative art? I think Ania, maybe like a little bit of context on the background of our practice first. Yeah.
So we met in 2016, and before starting to work together with Operator, we had individual and different practices, but kind of since the beginning, the key pillars to what we've been making together have combined immersive environments, technology, and performance. This is some of our early works, ranging from installations to websites to conceptual fashion pieces to fashion shows, installations of all kinds. And even though in different ways, the human body was central to what I was doing before, because I'm a choreographer and performance artist. So I look at the body as a material, as a site, as both the canvas and the paint. And I was very focused on just the body and performance. And I wasn't working with generative art or any kind of technology before Operator.
My background is as a multimedia artist. I studied human-computer interaction and would develop large-scale immersive artworks, installations. From the beginning, I was always thinking about how to create systems of play, emergent systems, and how to interact with a computer without using a mouse and a keyboard. So I was really inspired by invisible technology and physical computing and the work by Mark Weiser at Xerox PARC. And early on, so this was incredibly over 20 years ago when I was at university. And so I dug up some of the, I would say, important books that I can recall right now that have informed my practice, and a few of these are written by Casey and friends. And so there's a book called Form and Code, and the very famous Processing Blue Bible book we have here, in which I began learning, processing, understanding about emergent behaviors, also through this book to rules of play and thinking through game design. And this book is really interesting in that it doesn't go straight into digital works or digital games, but it talks about rules of play and developing a simple rule set for even board games or physical games or word games, in which if you can develop a simple rule set, what you then receive on the other end when others interact is emergent behavior, right? And emergent outcomes. And so this really built my foundation of understanding generative systems and emergent systems and how you develop the underlying fundamental framework of how one will interact with the work or how a work can be created. But you can't necessarily control the outcome other than the outcome, it's emergent. It fits within a world and a system that you've designed. It's a way of control and also a way of no control. And this also was simultaneously, I was studying the happenings of Alan Capro that were happening. At the same time, we had experiments of art and technology from the 60s, where you had engineers interacting with and collaborating with contemporary artists, and also Black Mountain College, where you saw extreme experimentation. And I think these were really two interesting tracks to think of experiential work, developing art as an experience. And so much of that was audience participatory, and so much of that was building, basic systems, whether physical or digital. And in 2021, because we were asked to share maybe some of the more historical work or earlier generative artworks that we've created. Ania, maybe I'll let you take this one, Automatiste in 2021.
Yeah, in preparing for this talk, we were looking at work that we have made together and going back. And this was, I think, the first kind of generative work that we made together. And it was an interesting context. It was COVID, and we were asked to do something with a fashion brand to represent their collection at London Fashion Week, their autumn-winter collection. And of course, no one could leave home. So what most of the fashion brands were doing was they were doing fashion films. But the brand said, like, what do you want to do? And we said, we would like to make a browser-based experience. So that's what we did.
I don't know if you remember this, but they were like, can we put it on YouTube? Because everyone was doing like fashion films.
Oh yeah, and then they were upset. They were upset that they couldn't put this on YouTube. But we were like, no, you don't understand. This is better than a fashion film. People are like, every experience, any person that visits the website and is going through the images and the subtitle image pairings and scanning the QR codes, they're interacting, and they were just like mad that it couldn't go on YouTube. But we were really excited about this browser-based experience, that you could never have the same experience twice. We did kind of like GAN interpretations of the collection. We had 3D scenes, live action footage, and then a collection of subtitles that were randomly paired with images and scenes throughout. So everyone, it was kind of a generative nonlinear narrative that also had QR codes and led to portals to filters where you could enter into the world of the protagonist. So this was during COVID, when people were, at home and bored, and this was our version of how we could plunge an audience into a fashion collection in kind of a new way that maybe was also a little bit more accessible than, London Fashion Week. Here's the front row, here's the VIPs. Every single person had the same experience, or the same level of experience. They had a different experience because each time the website was visited, it was different. But this was our first kind of generative work 2021 for London Fashion Week, of all places.
The next is privacy portraits. So we developed this in 2022. It's, I think, the second lot of the privacy collection. And here what we did was we anonymized the audience participants' photographs, which was then minted as an NFT and was, an artwork that they were able to take home. This artwork is using analog algorithms. So essentially what we had were sort of a toolbox of materials that were, glass or acrylic, fire, acid, bleach, different types of materiality that we would use based on a dice roll. And I can have some good video of that here. Yeah, here you go. Where based on a dice roll, so you would walk into the experience, you would see the portraits that had already been anonymized, projected within this projection mapping system that we developed. We had, I think, 8 performers who helped curate like kind of the experience for the audience participant to flow from one station to another. So they would start by going up the stairs. Ania would take their photograph on Polaroid stock, and then that was put into a security box and brought to the next station, in which they were instructed by the docent to do a number of dice rolls. Those numbers were written down as kind of like, I don't know, like a deli order. They kind of felt, because I felt like I was making sandwiches, but I was making portraits where I would just have the same. I would just have the orders of like a bunch of different numbers, and those numbers like corresponded with a different type of anonymization technique. And we did this for 3 days straight. I think something like 6 hours a day, where we would just go through this process, and finally you would scan the work, and then we'd go into the projection mapping system and then also be minted. So this is also tying to, I think, like chance operations, as Ania was talking about. Merce Cunningham. Also, you have I Ching and the work done by John Cage as well. And most recently, this is a totally, I think, different evolution of how generative art has become present in our practice. And it is through what we call a performance operating system, which is really an extension of the method that I was telling you about earlier in the presentation, in which you have this ability to, collect dance as an art object and performance as an art object. But arguably even more important than that, because there's one thing to be, being able to participate in the art market, but it's another one to think about how performance is archived and how performance moves on. So it's like there's been, a historical problem, which could be seen as a beautiful thing, but it's an ephemeral work. So the moment a performance ends, it also begins to die. And like when we look at how ephemeral artworks are transmitted now, we see that every model depends on the system outside of the work itself. And so there's 4 examples here, which I won't go into too much detail, but you have artists like Tino Segal, who refuses documentation and only transmits his performance through oral transmission and handshakes to institutions. However, this is a body-to-body, transmission. But when that chain breaks, it is also lost. And you have the institution also as the gatekeeper. You have artists like help me.
Felix Gonzalez Torres.
Who uses paper certificates, essentially, instruction art. And, if those are preserved and archived properly, you have, that element, but these are also held by institutions. You have Pina Bausch, who her estate, had all of these photographs. So it was something like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of material that were kind of put together through detective work by the foundation in order to reconstruct from those artifacts what was Balsha's intent. And then you have someone like Marina Abramovich, who her method is really reliant on the institution that she has developed. And so like you always have these like systems outside of the work itself in order to bring the work to life again. And so, yeah, go ahead, Anya. Sorry.
Yeah, for repeat as necessary, repeat as necessary was built. Everything was around generating a particular nervous system journey in the body of the audience. So kind of looking at technologies of the body and highlighting the technology of the body, because as we were there's a lot of technological processes in Human Unreadable, and I think by the end I was the most amazed by the body as a technology, which kind of inspired this idea of leveraging what the body can do, looking at things like neural entrainment and mirror neurons and the way that certain frequencies and certain types of breathing and certain types of movement and ways of viewing other bodies can completely create different and kind of transcendent states, even in the body of the audience who is not moving. So just diving into that and kind of creating this almost ritual template. But there's also the problem, if you're a maker of performance, that we loved this piece, we loved the performance, but we also cannot spend the rest of our lives activating this performance, but we wanted other people to experience it. We didn't want it to be limited to that one time we did it in Bodrum. We wanted other people to be able to enact this somewhere else, bring it to other countries, put their spin on it. And so this idea of creating not just the work, but from the very beginning, it's like, we're not just making this performance, we're also making this kind of template so the work can be repeated as necessary, because we felt that the piece and the work and the experience and the physical experience that even the audience had witnessing it was something that we wanted to keep spreading, and we wanted it to continue in this kind of organic, decentralized way without it being our job for the next 20 years, because we have other things we want to make too.
Yeah, and so that focused this into the question of what if the work were the system itself. And so how does that practically work? So there's two things that were built for this project. And like I said, it was an extension. The performance operating system is the extension on the technical work that we started developing in 2022 for Human Unreadable as part of the method, in which you essentially have a single collector that holds the complete architecture to restage the performance. And this all lives on a blockchain. With also redundancies across other blockchains, as well as some archival hygiene suggestions to the collector as well, in case these blockchains go down, which is possible. But the idea is that they basically own the engine to create the performances again and again. And then we also have the 40 notations, which fit within the operating system. And those 40 notations are a way to, in partnership with the Notation Legend, which is like a 60-page document to tell you how to decode this custom notation that we developed, is that you have these many different elements. And I'm actually going to go forward here first and hop back once. So you have the experience presented through and expressed through motion data. So, the movement library. So this is all of the movements captured, stored on chain, right? We have the performance provenance every time that performance has been reperformed, listed within the ledger on chain. We have the notation legend itself, a video reference, which is stored on Arweave, which has an ASCII time map that is stored in a smart contract on Ethereum, the costume design, the choreographic direction, the music score, and the music itself, and the 40 scores that show you the formations and the choreography of the breath, the audience, the nervous system journey that Ania was telling you about, as well as the positions of the performers on stage. And all of this is owned by a single registry contract, which has its own NFT, which we're looking at now. So this is a screen recording. This is just vanilla HTML and CSS. This is essentially an on-chain website, and each one of these components that you see here, so these zones listed from A to H, are referencing and reading on-chain contract data from the other smart contracts that I just showed you in that tree, and they're pulling in that data, and you're able to kind of browse, and these are windows into those other smart contracts. So it's almost like a dashboard, an operating system for the entire performance architecture. And I think just to end on this aspect, we really want to think of the performance operating system not as documentation of past performances, but an engine for future ones. And in that way, for us, it's very much a generative system because it's meant there to generate performances, until you can't anymore. And so I think the other thing here is that, for us, it's more important to contain and preserve the system rather than trying to do something that is impossible, which is to capture and bottle up a performance that already happened. That's, I think, a futile sort of, undertaking. But this is something that we can appreciate for the system to generate for years to come. And
yeah, I think one more note on that is we've been thinking a lot about what it means to own a performance. And there's so many different views of how, and a lot of performance artists are also anti-documentation because they believe that the ephemerality and the fact that it only happened there, and if you didn't feel the breath of the performer, then you weren't experiencing any art. I also believe that there is no way to capture, you can have documentation of a performance, but that then kind of becomes a different artwork. Like the documentation is kind of its own artwork. It's a translation. It's never meant to, and it will never be able to capture the feeling of what happened in the room for people who were there. But how do we also solve the economic problems of performance? So this idea of selling the package that allows the performance to be what it is, to be ephemeral, not pretending we can capture it, not trying to like bottle the past, but instead sell the potential for the future performances to exist as they're meant to be experienced. That is a way that both makes it so there's a little bit more economic viability for performance because it can be owned, it can be transacted, but at the same time, it's not turning it into a flat photograph and saying this is the performance. It's honoring that it should be live and it should be evolving. It should change and iterate and breathe and continue into the future as long as it can. If that's what the artist wants. If the artist wants it to happen once and never again, then that's on them and that's also fine. But for others, I think the possibility for it to continue over time and have the essence kind of captured and evolving is important.
So we have maybe just a couple more minutes to answer this last question, and then we are going to be in conversation with Casey. So what are you working on now, they ask. Ania, you want to give us a super, super brief pass on Act 3 and what we're working on there?
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, Human Unreadable is a piece in 3 acts, and it culminates with a final performance where the audience gets to see on-chain generative art experienced through the body through an original evening-length work, where these sequences become the raw material and no more technological mediation, just humans witnessing other humans. Arguably the most profound thing we can experience these days. And this will be happening in November. There's 5 performances, and that's it. This is what we're working on, and it's like making an opera, so it's beyond a full-time project, but it's super exciting. We actually just sent out the casting today, so if anyone knows dancers in New York, reach out to us and we can send the link to audition.
Yeah, as Ania said, this is kind of a multimedia performance installation theater work almost. And there will be over 20 performers with fabrication elements, 5 performances with 2 live streams. So we're thinking of the live stream as an artistic medium as well. Those will be hosted at the partnering institutions. And I think the announcement of where this is happening will be in July, so stay tuned. And that same museum, of which Act 3 will be premiering, has also commissioned a digital artwork to be in connection with Act 3. And so we thought a lot about the idea of the aura. And, I'm sure many of you have heard of Walter Benjamin's work, where he was concerned of the decay of an aura, like of a work itself, even by physically taking it out of its original environment that the aura dies. And I think, as we think of how technology is implemented into works now, I think that question becomes really, really interesting. For us, it doesn't negate, the ability for the aura to exist. In fact, I think it could potentially even do the opposite. And so we kind of created this framework for this commission where we thought about how the aura can migrate from the art object to the process of creating the work itself. And this is an artwork that is largely using artificial intelligence and agentic systems and a baseline archive of our process in order to in order to create almost like a database artwork. And we see AI really talked about a lot for its generative capabilities in terms of what can it generate, what can it output, and the value really emphasized there. We see a lot of retrieval, emphasis on retrieval, and emphasis on agents, for example, and artificial intelligence to act on our behalf. But what we would like to propose is a fourth mode, which is artificial intelligence systems as a witness, and kind of an AI that holds and remembers and potentially mostly stays quiet. And so the artwork that we conceptualize is titled Entr'acte, and Entr'acte has a double medium, meaning, because it is a word that in French means intermission. But Entr'acte itself has a different sort of historical and a more historical framing in which artists and musicians and composers would develop moments for the intermission, for the entr'acte. And that would be, essentially a moment to process what comes between acts, what just happened, what is about to come, right? And it's sort of a theatrical structure. And
it's like a choreographing the in-between.
Choreographing the in-between, right? And a moment for processing. And, but we're kind of looking as acts, not just as Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, how we are in Human Unreadable, but the act of creation, that creative act, a gesture of doing. And this artwork is essentially a witness to the creative process. It's a database work, and Act 3 has all these sampled points in terms of everything that we input into the process, and you have this essentially this latent space of our process, and everything that is in between those data points is what we want to explore. And so how we use it now, and Ania, maybe you want to talk a little bit about this before I move to the next slide.
Yeah, we use it as we're making Act 3. I mean, almost all of our conversations are recorded, and there's this really incredible document that Dejha mentioned earlier that translator of Portala Pina Bausch published called Inheriting Dance, and it talks a lot about the struggle that people had trying to understand and put fragments together of why was the balloon in that piece red? Was it almost blue? And then why did she in the end decide that it was red? And there's actually so much meaning in discarded ideas of the things that almost made it into the piece, or the debates about one decision versus the other. And so what we wanted to do is basically make it so we're feeding everything that we are doing for this piece. And so there's never going to be a question of how did they arrive to choosing a ladder for that scene with the moon. You know, like they'll be able to understand exactly what the latter meant, where the origin of that idea came from. And this is kind of also something that Dejha and I, from the very beginning, have always been very interested in process. Like watching artist documentaries, understanding the why, understanding. There's this really great book about artists and writers' morning rituals that we found fascinating. Like sometimes the way things are done, the way things are approached, the thinking behind something is like more important and more exciting and kind of motivating for us than the work itself. So knowing that we are thirsty for like that kind of material and we scourge the internet for these kind of process things, we are making that for the process of making the biggest performance, maybe our breakout work of Act 3. All of that will be captured.
Yeah. I think I like to make this example of the Beatles recording, for example, like the White Album in Abbey Road Studios, and connected to what Ania just said about essentially artistic memory and understanding later what the artist's intent was as well, and being able to explore that. We all know these people. We all have these people in our lives where it's like, wow, this person was there in the room while XYZ artwork was made, or this film was made, or that that championship was won. And the person who witnessed that can hold that aura for us and can be our sort of link and our access point. And I think of all the engineers in the room who were creating the White Album, for example, with the Beatles. And we think of Entr'acte really as that every artwork has its own hidden history. Every artwork has all of the doubts and the conversations that shape that work. Everything that didn't get included in the final work is very much work, as much of the work as the final work itself. And Entr'acte as an artwork is everything that the stage on Act 3 cannot hold. And when you arrive to interacting with our artwork, once it goes on view, you are essentially enabled to have a dialogue with our entire creative process. In interest of time, I'm not going to go through these others than to say, if you would like to talk about this more, please out to us and we can tell you how the system works. But I think it's important to wrap up and give the conversation back to Casey. And thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. So many things to think about. And I'm really excited about some of the crossover with what we're beginning to do with social software, which is now about 2 years old, and what you have happening with Operator, which congratulations on the 10th anniversary. Maybe we'll just take a breath really quick, just like a short pause. I know you've been talking a lot.
Stretch.
I have 5 questions for you, and they start general and then they get a little more specific. And they're all sort of, impromptu, made while you were speaking. So they're fresh questions. Oh, thanks. First question, the nature of your collaboration. How do you develop ideas together? How do you make decisions? Like, what is the nature of that process?
Oof. Has anyone ever asked us that?
I don't know.
I don't think so. Like I'm drawing a blank. I think usually there's a seed from one side or another. And I think there's way more seeds. Obviously, there's way more seeds that we have discussed together than there are projects, because in the end, we're only 2 people. But it's like, I could be like, oh, look at this. Or you could be like, hey, did you know that this could this? And then sometimes it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then sometimes there's a mutual excitement over whatever that means. And then we find ourselves talking about it a lot. And then it naturally kind of like snowballs into a project. So I think there's literally on a weekly basis, it's like, oh, maybe we could do this. Oh, maybe we could do that. Oh, it would be so cool if we blah blah blah. But then they have like a variety of if it was a snowball, it has like a variety of levels of like or how many rolls that snowball gets, and some just like keep going, like there's a very natural momentum and interest, and one person's excitement gets fed by the other, and then it turns into, okay, this is like project worthy versus this is something that we're excited to just talk about and ideate. um so I think that's how I would say, but it's an interesting question.
I think one thing I was very interested in is the way that you come from different backgrounds, but I think have such a conceptual place where you connect, and the way that you were both
Mm,
on different paths, and the way that when you met, you started a new path together that was different from what you were doing before. It's really inspiring to see
mm.
what you're able to do together. So does that mm, context add any other thoughts to the question?
For me, I mean, we've clocked a lot of time together, Ania and I, these past 10 years. And when we first met in 2016, uh, we met at this cafe called Zinc in Venice Beach. And I remember that conversation turned out to be like a really long homework list that you and I gave each other of
Mhm.
artistic and just like artistic references or films, dances, choreographers, artists, books,
Books.
YouTube videos, and we're like, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? And we still have those coasters. They were written on the back of those coasters. We still have those. And I think that was really informative in terms of what it was going to look like,
Hmm.
because that time period, I think in 2016 and 2017, we were consuming so much art together, and
Hmm.
we living our day to day together. And in that time, we were able to create a shared language, and we were in this constant R&D process over every minute of the day, having coffee, and it's like everything became art, because if we just like looked at it in a particular way and we put a frame around it, then we could say, hey, if we look at it this way, that's art. And so we just like did this for like years, and we were creating
Hmm.
works. And as the practice like developed and we created one work after another work after another work, we began to develop, of course we have our separate practices in terms of like how we approach creating art, and we're very different in the way that we actually sit down to like create art.
Hmm.
um, but in terms of having this like shared language developed over a decade, I think this is something that um, is unique to our process. Um and yeah, it's just a way, a shared vernacular, a shared frame, as a way of creating on, I think, even the conceptual level before anything actually like physically exists.
Thank you for entertaining that question.
Mhm.
All right, next one. You mentioned medium agnostic a lot. Can you say a little bit more about what that means, especially maybe for younger artists who maybe haven't heard that term before?
Yeah, so for we have these operator rules for art and technology, which um, we kind of dislike this like kind of term art and technology, because it like puts the emphasis on the technology and like where it shouldn't be, which is it should actually be on the art. And one of the rules is to hear the concept and to really like not focus on novel technologies, because there's novel technologies are only novel for so long. And so leaning into, especially we run the risk with creating with um, you know the amount of technology that we have today that is so easily accessible. It's like we want to be sure that we're creating something that is rooted in the concept rather than rooted in a tech demo or spectacle. And for us, we always start with, okay, what is it that we're trying to say? Who are we trying to
Hmm.
say it do. And part of that decision for the artwork that is so fundamental is what is the best way to communicate this idea to it within this context, whether it be site specific, whether it be to a particular group of people, whether it has a particular concept that like deserves a particular medium. So choosing the medium itself is part of, you know, the artwork. And like maybe that sounds obvious, but you know, for us, we don't just default say, okay, we're going to make a dance, or we're going to make a performance, or we're going to make an installation, we're going to make a website. It's like that has to the kind of that the medium doesn't really matter until like a bit later when
until you know the message that it's delivering. Yeah. And I think between us, we have a wide variety of different creative skills like in our pockets. Like Dejha had, you know, a design studio and was doing like big, large scale projection. Like I was directing dance films, working a lot with movement and the body, writing. And then we come together and it's like we have this bag of things we could do. And so, yeah, like you just said, what are we trying to say and what is the combination? Like for this, it would be good to like merge writing and performance, or this one, like machine learning and poetry. Like, you know, it's like what is the best combination? And there's just because we can work with technology, like we've also done projects that are, we're like, technology would be unnecessary here. And I don't like the idea that you have to do the same thing over and over again. And the art market kind of would disagree. Like the art market really rewards people who do something similar over and over. So I wouldn't say that's financial advice to follow and make whatever you want, but we like to have that flexibility. And I even used to say, like early on, I'd be like, we probably wouldn't get into like sculpture, and then literally like we now have these X-ray machine sculptures. So I really don't say anything is off limits at this point. Like I have no, there are no limits. So medium agnostic is kind of our way of hearing the content moving forward and being able to allow ourselves the creative freedom to use whatever mediums we need to do what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would say that the work is very conceptually focused, and the craft is so strong in the work too, which I really admire. Whether it's image-based work or installation or object making or the way that you're choosing to work with smart contracts, everything is really precise and driven by the concept. It's something I really admire about the work.
Thank you.
Question 3. The role of notation and diagrams in your process. How do you use them to think, and how do you use them to present? Like I've seen you draw some of the like core diagrams of Human Unreadable or paint them on the wall a few times. Like what is the role of those in both situations?
Yeah, well, the ones that you've seen, which I think you're referring to, probably the method painting that we would, for every Human Unreadable gallery or museum show that we would have in connection to that work, we would draw out the method on the gallery wall. And I think sometimes, there's experiencing the work for what it is, and that's one way to experience the work, but then experiencing the process. And this is kind of like brings us to our most recent work on Tract, which we're developing now, is a different way to experience the work, because I would argue that it's almost as much of the work as the final sort of output, like the final output that is like created and is born is almost like a formality, like it has to end sometime. It has to exist, and that's how
there has to be a centerpiece on the dinner table.
But then what you saw drawn on the wall, well, that actually originally came from the notebooks while we're trying to hash out what is this system? What are the primitives of this system to describe it to ourselves? And so eventually, that ended up in the snapshot that it is and has a final form. But I think also given, there's diagramming for the concept of the work, right? Like, how are all these ideas connected, and that can be, collages, like photos and references and quotes and, many different mediums coming together. This is like essentially why we built Tract, is because it allows us to like harness, become almost like a super AI like process notebook, where we can like have a multimodal notebook where we can retrieve all of our process content at in a fraction of a second. But then there is, given that our work is so production and execution focused as well, it's like that requires an immense amount of organization. And so it's not just about organizing the ideas, but then at one point we're drawing these just to like sort out what is the system itself. So yeah, there are mountains of notebooks and files that have drawings that I'm sure none of us will ever see, but have been very valuable to the process. Ania, do you have a different take?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, in the way that we're talking about for Untracked, the process becoming the art, or in an age where you can create an image or an essay or a poem with a short prompt, and this idea of the artist aura migrating away from the output or the final product and being more inside of the process. I think the fact that you're taking this diagram and painting it on a canvas with acrylic paint, also like retroactively, I'm thinking about, it's kind of a way of saying this process of all of this is also art in the way that a painting is art. So it's like translating this process and this diagram and something that's like messy and behind the scenes, but into a medium that people are used to looking at art on, or looking at art through. So like maybe if you take this process and you put it acrylic on canvas and you hang it on a wall, people can understand that this process is art because you translated it into a more digestible way of seeing art is on a canvas. This process is on a canvas. This is art. Something like this. On the subject of notation, I have a quick thing, which is for repeat as necessary. And we haven't really talked about this a lot, but for the notation for those pieces, the 40 works, we wanted to take a different approach to notation because of what we were saying earlier about performance and what is the work of performance even. And classically, notation is often showing what movements are happening, like where the dancers are on stage, how they're moving, what the quality of the movement is. And in these pieces, we decided to notate not just what the dancers are doing, but we actually notated what is happening in the body of the audience. So the dots are showing where the dancers are on physical space if you were looking at it from an aerial view. So the dots are, they're in this formation, they spread out here, there's two dancers here, there's one, blah, blah. But all the other marks are not, they're not saying what the dancers are doing. They're notating the musical frequencies in the room at that moment. They're notating the nervous system state of the audience, heart rate, basically other parameters. Like we're notating the experience of the audience in the pieces so that those pieces are not capturing the performance, just what the dancers are doing, but they're more of a snapshot of what is happening in that room. And that, I think, is a very exciting approach to notation that, well, it makes me happy.
Yeah, it's a good lead to the next question, which is about dance and choreography. You showed some work and talked about, Simone Forti, Merce Cunningham, and Olivia Cordero. And you mentioned that in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a lot of active work with integrating dance and experimentation with technology and with the arts. So what is the potential for you as operator to be a bridge from that moment to the present? And do you see that as being a generator for growth of sort of emergent forms of dance and choreography?
I really hope so. I mean, that's also my aim, even because I think there's a lot of people who understand digital art And there's a lot of people who understand the dance world or like the reality of dance and movement and choreographic practices, but there's not a lot of people who really understand both of those worlds and can figure out where each of them have solutions for the other and like how they can meet and connect. And we've always wanted Human Unreadable and the method and now the performance operating systems to be something that is exactly providing that bridge. So when we've had institutions like Jacob's Pillow, which is one of the most significant, like legendary, iconic dance organizations in the world, in the US, now, showing works about dancing and algorithms, like we're seeing that the dance world is now getting out of this phase where it's saying that technology is always like the opposite of the body, or technology is only something that interferes with the purely physical experience of dance, because there's a lot of that in the dance world, where it seems like technology is just something that would get in the way of something that is so beautiful, which is just physical and simple in space and time, rather than seeing the ways that actually technology can augment creatively, functionally, infrastructurally, in ways that I think would benefit everyone to make even bolder work, to take more risks, to have more opportunities, to reach more audiences. So I think that's one of our biggest goals, is to be part of building that bridge where we can see how those worlds can feed each other. Also, I think the digital art world has a lot to learn from the power of performance. And I also think the art world is realizing the deeper that we go into technology, the more people are craving physical experience, touch. Loneliness is a problem. Like, we need to see people, we need to use our bodies, we need to move, we need to sleep. That's not going anywhere, no matter how advanced technology gets. So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination, and I really hope, and it's our aim, that like the work we're doing is part of building those connections.
Thank you. All right, last question. It's a bit of an odd one.
Mhm.
Medium agnostic practice, but you do use smart contracts. Why do you use them, and what do you see as their potential for you realizing your ideas? Like the medium of the smart contract.
I think I mentioned earlier that for the first 7 years of our practice, we were only doing commission-based work and really define ourselves as experience-based artists, in that, um, creating multimedia works to develop a singular experience, no matter what all the ingredients are. It's really about that moment that happens when someone is experiencing the work. And the works that we have developed in like the first 7 years of our practice take place in space and time, and they're physical, and regardless of any use of technology. And there's something that is special that happens when an audience participant, and we've always imagined that the people who experience the work are audience participants, right? Like, their presence there affects the work, and their presence there is what completes the work. And there's something really special that happens when you can clock time with an audience participant, with someone who is someone who's going to do the work, because if they're there for what you can do in 2 minutes versus what you can do in 20 minutes versus 30 minutes versus an hour, and then you can keep pulling them into the world logic that you develop as an artist, and more becomes possible by allowing them to basically like fall asleep into our world logic of the work. And so this is like why we were never really interested in creating, I guess, what classically is like flat art, or things that are like really marketable and like easy to sell, because we're like, well, then we lose all that. And that's the most important part to us. And if we lose that, then we don't want anything to do with it. But in 2022, and I think end of 2021, we started thinking about blockchain more from the frame as a medium than a distribution system for NFTs. That too, of course. And I think it's important that NFTs have had the distribution system, like what that has done for artists and have changed their lives for some and for some others not. But like for us, we were primarily interested in like how can we use blockchain as this sort of really durable, long-lasting interface between us and the audience participant, and what blockchain technology can afford in that regard of our interest in duration in a work that most other mediums would not be able to support. And that at that moment, when we realized we could use smart contracts as a way to stay in connection with audience participants, or I guess formerly this group of people are called collectors, but we still see them as audience participants, because it's like, you know,
collector audience participants.
That we're able to maintain a connection with them, even if we don't know them, you know, but we're able to interact with them with blockchain as an experiential interface in a way that we haven't been able to do with any other technology.
Over years too.
Yeah.
Like before, we would do a project for a weekend and then people might come and experience an installation and be like, wow, this is fantastic. But we have no link to them over the coming years. And I think what's incredible is for Human Unreadable, this is in the end like a 4-year project, and there's been multiple touch points and evolutions and moments throughout where over years, through the people who own pieces, we have a 4-year basically ongoing experience. Like it unlocks duration, which I think is a really powerful tool for immersion and experience for any artist. That's the most valuable thing, I think, for us.
Glad I asked that wonky question. That was an amazing answer. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to prepare this work for us, to like dig deep in your archives and share things, and for the this is a wonderful time. So many ideas introduced that I think I'll be thinking about them for a long time. So we'll wrap up.
Casey,
We'll say
thank you.
goodbye, and thank you so much for the audience who joined us for this. We did record this, and we will be figuring out the best way to post it. But Dejha, Ania, thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in as well.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.